The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the iron railings. Among them stood Sarah Mitchell, a young mother from Manchester holding tightly to her 6-year-old daughter Emma's hand. Emma's eyes sparkled with wonder as she watched the magnificent black horses standing perfectly still, their riders adorned in gleaming ceremonial armor and tall plumed helmets. The Queen's lifeguard had been performing their duties for centuries, and today was no different. Trooper James Wellington sat atop his horse, Midnight, maintaining the stoic composure that had been drilled into him during months of rigorous training. His eyes, however, remained constantly alert, scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. The horse beneath him was equally well trained, a majestic Shire horse whose bloodline traced back generations of royal service. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing excitedly at the golden breastplate that caught the sunlight. Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood visits to London with her grandmother. She had saved for months to bring Emma here, wanting to share the magic of the royal traditions that had captivated her as a child. The little girl pressed her face against the cool metal bars, trying to get a better view of the impressive ceremony unfolding before them. Other families crowded around them, cameras clicking and children chattering in various languages. An elderly Japanese couple stood nearby, their grandson translating the historical significance of the guards for them. A group of American teenagers posed for selfies, their excitement infectious as they marveled at the living piece of history before them. The atmosphere was peaceful and joyful, filled with the innocent wonder that such grand traditions inspire in visitors from around the world. Parents lifted small children onto their shoulders for better views, while tour guides shared fascinating stories about the guards' responsibilities and the horses' training. Emma listened intently to every word, her imagination painting pictures of knights and princesses in the very place where real royalty lived and worked. As the morning progressed, the crowd began to shift and change. Some tourists moved on to other attractions, while new visitors arrived to witness the ceremony. Sarah noticed Emma growing tired but still mesmerized by the horses. She decided they would stay just a few more minutes before heading to their next destination. Little did she know that these next few minutes would change their understanding of the guards' role from ceremonial to genuinely protective. The peaceful morning was about to take an unexpected turn that would demonstrate why these guards were not merely decorative figures, but highly trained protectors whose horses were as vigilant and intelligent as their riders. In the crowd, a figure began moving with purpose that would soon catch the attention of both the guards and their remarkable horses. Among the tourists, a middle-aged man in a worn brown jacket had been circling the area for nearly an hour. David Clark appeared ordinary enough, blending in with the other visitors, but his behavior had begun to set him apart. Unlike the families who moved together in natural groups, he wandered alone, his eyes not focused on the ceremonial guards but scanning the crowd with an intensity that seemed out of place. Clark had been watching the Mitchell family specifically, noting how Sarah occasionally became distracted by her phone and the guidebook she carried. He observed Emma's fascination with the horses and how the little girl had gradually moved closer to the railings as her excitement grew. What the other tourists didn't know was that Clark had a history that would have alarmed them greatly had they been aware of it. Trooper Wellington had noticed the man's unusual behavior through his peripheral vision. Years of training had taught him to identify potential threats while maintaining his ceremonial stance. The way Clark moved through the crowd, the manner in which his gaze lingered on certain families, and his repeated circling of the same area had triggered the guard's instincts. Wellington's grip on his reins tightened almost imperceptibly, and beneath him, Midnight seemed to sense his rider's increased alertness. Sarah became momentarily distracted when she received an urgent call from her sister about their father's upcoming birthday plans. She stepped slightly away from Emma, still keeping one eye on her daughter while trying to hear over the crowd noise. Emma, completely enchanted by the horses, pressed even closer to the railings. Her small hands gripped the metal bars as she stood on her tiptoes, trying to see every detail of the magnificent animals and their riders. Clark saw his opportunity. With practiced casualness, he began moving toward Emma, his approach calculated to appear accidental. He had done this before in other crowded places, always choosing moments when parents were distracted and children were separated by even the smallest distance. His heart raced with anticipation as he drew closer to the little girl who was now standing alone at the barrier. Other tourists continued their conversations and photo-taking, unaware of the drama beginning to unfold. A family from Germany debated which attraction to visit next, while an elderly British couple shared stories with some visitors from Australia about the changing of the guard ceremony they had witnessed decades earlier. The normal sounds of tourism created a backdrop of safety that masked the approaching danger. Emma remained completely absorbed in watching the horses, pointing excitedly at different details and whispering to herself about what she was seeing. She had no awareness that someone was approaching her with intentions that would have terrified her parents. The innocence of childhood had left her vulnerable in a way that only the trained eyes of the Queen's Guard had detected. As Clark moved within arm's reach of Emma, something extraordinary began to happen. Midnight, the ceremonial horse started exhibiting behavior that was far from ceremonial. The animal's ears pricked forward, his nostrils flared, and his entire body language shifted from peaceful service to protective alertness. Midnight's transformation was remarkable to witness. The massive horse, who had been standing in perfect ceremonial stillness moments before, suddenly became a living wall of protection. His training as a Queen's Guard horse included not just parade discipline, but also threat assessment, and every instinct he possessed was now focused on the man approaching the small child. Trooper Wellington felt the change in his mount immediately. The subtle communication between horse and rider, developed through countless hours of training together, told him everything he needed to know. Midnight was responding to a genuine threat, not a false alarm. Wellington's years of experience had taught him to trust his horse's instincts completely, as these animals often detected dangers that humans missed. Clark reached out toward Emma, his fingers nearly touching her shoulder. He had rehearsed what he would say, how he would appear helpful and kind, drawing the child away from the safety of the crowd. His voice was ready with the practiced words that had worked before in other places with other children. But he never got the chance to speak them. With a movement that was both powerful and precise, Midnight stepped forward and positioned his massive bulk directly between Clark and Emma. The horse's action was deliberate and unmistakable. His body language communicated a clear message that transcended species barriers. This was not a random movement or a coincidence. This was protection in its purest form. Emma looked up in amazement as the enormous horse moved closer to her, his gentle brown eyes meeting hers with what seemed like understanding. She had no idea that she had just been protected from danger, but she sensed something special in the moment. The horse's presence felt comforting rather than frightening, as if he was watching over her like a guardian from the fairy tales her mother read to her. Clark stepped back, startled by the horse's intervention. He tried to move around to the other side, but Midnight shifted position again, maintaining the protective barrier. The horse's movements were calm but unmistakably intentional. Other tourists began to notice the unusual interaction, pointing and taking photos of what they assumed was a charming moment between a child and one of the famous guard horses. Sarah finished her phone call and turned back toward Emma, immediately noticing the horse's position and the way he seemed to be focused on her daughter. She hurried over, calling Emma's name with a smile, assuming her daughter had somehow charmed one of the magnificent animals. As she approached, she noticed the man in the brown jacket backing away with an expression of frustration and annoyance. Trooper Wellington maintained his ceremonial posture while allowing Midnight to continue his protective positioning. The guard's training included knowing when to break protocol for genuine security concerns, and this was clearly such a moment. He watched Clark carefully, noting the man's reaction, and filing away details that might be important later. The crowd's attention was now divided between admiring what appeared to be a sweet interaction between a horse and a child and trying to understand why the man who had been approaching seemed so agitated. Some tourists stepped closer, wanting to capture the moment on camera, while others began to sense that something more significant was happening than a simple photo opportunity with the guards. Sarah reached Emma and immediately sensed that something was different about the situation. A mother's intuition told her that the horse's behavior was not merely friendly interaction, but something more protective. She looked around and noticed the man in the brown jacket who seemed agitated and was now moving away from them with obvious reluctance. Emma tugged at her mother's hand, her voice filled with excitement and wonder. She told Sarah how the beautiful horse had moved close to her, and how she felt like he was her special friend. The little girl had no understanding of what had actually transpired, but she was thrilled by what she perceived as a magical connection with one of the Queen's horses. Trooper Wellington made eye contact with Sarah, and in that brief exchange, she understood that something serious had just occurred. The guard's expression, while maintaining professional composure, conveyed gratitude that she had returned when she did. Sarah felt a chill as she realized how close Emma had been to the stranger, and how the horse had positioned himself as a barrier. Clark, frustrated by the intervention, attempted once more to approach the area, this time trying a different angle, but Midnight was having none of it. The horse turned his head to track the man's movement, his ears laid back in a clear warning. The message was unmistakable to anyone who understood horse behavior. This animal was prepared to do whatever necessary to protect the child he had taken under his care. Other guards in the vicinity had noticed the unusual situation developing. Through subtle signals and practiced communication, they coordinated their awareness without breaking their ceremonial duties. The Queen's Guard operated as a team, and when one member identified a potential threat, the entire unit responded accordingly. A police officer on routine patrol noticed the commotion and began making his way through the crowd. Sergeant Patricia Holmes had been working the tourist areas around Buckingham Palace for 15 years and had developed an eye for situations that appeared innocent but might be something more. The behavior of both the horse and the man in the brown jacket caught her attention immediately. Sarah picked up Emma, holding her daughter close while continuing to watch the man who was now attempting to blend back into the crowd. She thanked Trooper Wellington quietly, though she knew he couldn't respond while on duty. The guard's slight nod acknowledged her gratitude and communicated that she and Emma were safe. Emma chatted happily about her special horse friend, completely unaware that she had just experienced one of the most frightening situations a parent could imagine. Her innocence was preserved, but Sarah would carry the memory of how close they had come to a tragedy, and how a magnificent horse had prevented it. Midnight gradually returned to his ceremonial stance, but his alert ears and watchful eyes continued to monitor the crowd. The horse's training and natural instincts had created a perfect storm of protection that had prevented what could have been a devastating incident. His actions demonstrated that the Queen's Guard horses were far more than ceremonial decorations. Sergeant Holmes approached Sarah and Emma with the practiced ease of an experienced officer who knew how to gather information without causing alarm. She introduced herself casually, commenting on how wonderful it was to see the horses interacting so positively with visitors. Her trained eyes, however, were scanning the crowd for the man in the brown jacket that she had observed behaving suspiciously. Sarah found herself describing the events to the officer, her voice steady, but her hands still trembling slightly from the realization of what might have happened. She explained how distracted she had become with the phone call, and how the horse had seemed to deliberately position himself between Emma and the stranger. The officer listened carefully, taking mental notes while maintaining a friendly demeanor that wouldn't frighten Emma. Emma continued to wave at Midnight, completely absorbed in her belief that she had made a special friend among the Queen's horses. She asked her mother if they could come back tomorrow to visit her horse friend again. Sarah smiled at her daughter's innocence while feeling profound gratitude for the animal's protective instincts. Trooper Wellington, still maintaining his ceremonial position, was able to provide subtle assistance to the police officer through carefully timed glances and minimal gestures that indicated the direction Clark had taken. The communication between guard and officer demonstrated the seamless cooperation between different branches of security that protected the royal grounds and its visitors. Meanwhile, Clark had moved to a different area of the palace grounds, hoping to find another opportunity. But his unusual behavior earlier had not gone unnoticed by other members of the security team. Plainclothes officers had been alerted, and a discreet surveillance operation was now tracking his movements throughout the tourist area. The morning's events had triggered a chain reaction of protective measures that most tourists never see. The Queen's Guard, the Metropolitan Police, and Palace Security worked together with practiced efficiency to ensure that no other families would face the threat that the Mitchells had unknowingly encountered as Sarah and Emma prepared to continue their tour of London. Other tourists began approaching them with compliments about how sweet the interaction between Emma and the horse had been. Several people had captured photos and videos of Midnight's protective positioning, though they didn't understand the true significance of what they had witnessed. An elderly woman from Scotland shared that she had been visiting the palace guards for 40 years and had never seen anything quite like the horse's behavior. She commented on how intelligent and caring the animals were, not knowing that she had just witnessed a perfect example of their training and natural protective instincts working together. Sarah exchanged contact information with Sergeant Holmes, who explained that they might need to follow up if the investigation into the suspicious individual required additional information. The officer reassured Sarah that she had done nothing wrong and that the quick response of both the horse and the security personnel had prevented any harm from occurring. Emma asked if she could give Midnight a treat, and with permission from Trooper Wellington conveyed through Sergeant Holmes, she was allowed to offer the horse a small apple that Sarah had brought for their lunch. The gentle way the massive animal accepted the gift from the tiny girl created a moment of pure magic that helped transform a frightening experience into a positive memory. 3 months later, Sarah received a phone call that brought the events of that morning at Buckingham Palace into sharp focus. Sergeant Holmes called to inform her that David Clark had been arrested in connection with multiple incidents involving children at tourist locations across London. The investigation had revealed a pattern of behavior that made Midnight's intervention even more significant than Sarah had initially realized. The man who had approached Emma that day was part of a larger investigation into child safety at major tourist attractions. Clark's arrest had led to the discovery of a network of individuals who specifically targeted busy public places where families gathered. The evidence collected painted a disturbing picture of calculated predation that relied on the chaos and distraction common in tourist areas. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and horror as she learned the full extent of what had been prevented that day. She thought about how different their lives might have been if not for the incredible instincts of a ceremonial horse who had recognized danger that human eyes had missed. The weight of gratitude she felt toward Midnight and Trooper Wellington was overwhelming. Emma, now older and more aware, listened as her mother carefully explained what had really happened that day. The little girl was amazed to learn that her special horse friend had actually been protecting her from a bad person. Her admiration for Midnight grew even stronger, and she declared that when she grew up, she wanted to train horses to help keep other children safe. The story of Midnight's intervention had spread throughout the Queen's Guard and palace security. The horse's actions became a teaching example of how the animal's training and natural instincts work together to provide protection beyond their ceremonial duties. Midnight became something of a legend among his fellow guard horses. Though he continued his duties with the same quiet dignity he had always shown, Trooper Wellington received recognition for his handling of the situation and for the excellent training relationship he had developed with Midnight. The bond between horse and rider had been crucial in allowing the animal's protective instincts to be expressed effectively while maintaining the discipline required for royal guard duty. Sarah and Emma returned to Buckingham Palace on the anniversary of their first visit. This time they came not just as tourists but as part of a small ceremony recognizing Midnight's service. The horse received a special commendation, and Emma was given the honor of presenting him with a commemorative rosette. The media coverage of the story helped raise awareness about child safety in tourist areas and highlighted the remarkable capabilities of the Queen's Guard horses. Many people learned for the first time that these animals were far more than decorative elements of royal pageantry, but highly trained partners in providing security and protection. As they stood before Midnight once again, Emma reached up to gently touch his soft nose while Sarah watched with tears in her eyes. The horse seemed to remember them, his gentle eyes reflecting the same protective care he had shown that frightening morning. In that moment, Sarah understood that they had witnessed something truly extraordinary, a perfect example of how courage and protection can come from the most unexpected sources. The friendship between Emma and Midnight became a symbol of the special relationship between the royal horses and the people they served to protect. Their story reminded everyone that heroism often comes in forms we might never expect, and that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are performed by those who cannot speak, but whose actions speak louder than any words ever could.